Some people say that the most devastating weapons in the world are not forged of steel, but of paper and ink. I used to think that was just a writer's fancy, a poetic turn of phrase. Now, at 73 years of age, I know it to be a gospel truth. The heaviest thing I ever held was not my husband's coffin, nor the weight of a life lived, but a simple cardboard box. It was a plain, brown, 2-foot by 2-foot box, and it held the power to detonate a half-century of my life. It all began on a Sunday, a rather glorious one in mid-May. The dogwoods were in full ostentatious bloom, dusting our manicured Connecticut lawn with what looked like pink confetti. It was Mother's Day. For 45 years, that day had followed a comfortable, predictable script. My husband, Richard Vance, would present me with an orchid, always a rare and spectacular variety. My son, Michael, would call precisely at 10 a.m., his voice a welcome balm, even across the miles to California, where he lived with his wife, Sarah. This year, however, the script had been altered. Richard had given me the orchid, a magnificent phalaenopsis with veins of deep purple, but his movements were clipped, his smile a tight, rehearsed thing. He paced the length of our sunroom, a place usually reserved for quiet contemplation and the Sunday paper, with the agitated energy of a caged animal. "Richard, for heaven's sake, sit down," I'd said, trying to arrange the orchid on the mahogany credenza. "You're making me dizzy." He stopped, running a hand through his still thick silver hair. He was 75, but he wore his age like a well-tailored suit, effortlessly and with an air of unearned authority. "Just restless, Eleanor. A lot on my mind with the firm." I didn't believe him. The firm, his investment banking empire, was his fortress, not his prison. Something else was gnawing at him. The 10 a.m. call from Michael never came. By 11, a knot of unease was tightening in my stomach. Michael had never, not once, missed that call. I tried his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. It was just after noon when the doorbell chimed. Richard practically jumped out of his skin. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see the familiar brown uniform of a courier. "I'll get it," Richard snapped, his voice unnaturally sharp. He returned moments later holding the box. It was addressed to me in Michael's familiar, slightly messy cursive. The return address was his home in Palo Alto. "It's from Michael!" I exclaimed, relief washing over me. "Oh, he sent a gift. He must have gotten held up this morning." I reached for it, my heart swelling with the simple, uncomplicated love of a mother. But Richard held it away from me, his face pale, his eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't place. It wasn't concern. It was fear. Stark, primal fear. He set the box down on the antique Persian runner as if it were a venomous snake. "Don't open it," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. I laughed, a bewildered, nervous sound. "What are you talking about, Richard? It's a Mother's Day gift from our son." "Don't open it," he repeated, his voice rising. He pointed a trembling finger at the corner of the box. "Can't you see?" I bent down, my knees creaking in protest. My eyes, even with my reading glasses, were not what they once were. I squinted at the spot he was indicating. There, next to the shipping label, was a small hand-drawn symbol in black marker. It was a tiny, stylized drawing of a knight, the chess piece. I looked up at him, completely baffled. "It's a knight. So what? Michael loves chess. We taught him how to play." "It's a warning, Eleanor," he hissed, backing away from the box. "He's trying to tell us something. It's not safe." I stared at him, then back at the box. My logical mind was at war with the panic in my husband's eyes. This was Michael, my gentle, brilliant son, the boy who brought me earthworms in a jar and called them his treasures. The man who cried when he told me he was going to be a father. The idea that he would send me something dangerous was ludicrous. Richard, you're being paranoid, I said, my patience fraying. He's probably been fighting with Sarah and he's being dramatic. You know how those two can be. I tried to inject a note of normalcy into the bizarre scene. No, he insisted, his gaze locked on the box. This is different. His wife. She's turned him against us. She's filled his head with poison. God only knows what they've cooked up. The accusation against Sarah, my lovely daughter-in-law whom I adored, was the final straw. My confusion hardened into anger. That is a ridiculous and cruel thing to say, I said, my voice cold. I am going to open my son's gift. Now, are you going to help me, or are you going to stand there cowering at a cardboard box? He looked at me, his face a mask of desperation. Eleanor, please, for once in your life, just listen to me. Throw it out. We'll call him later. We'll pretend it got lost. Please. The intensity of his plea gave me a moment's pause, but it was the phrase, for once in your life, just listen to me, that sealed his fate. It was his go-to line, the one he used to dismiss my opinions, my instincts, my very intellect for 45 years. It was the verbal pat on the head to the little woman, and on that day, it lit a fuse. No, Richard, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I will not. I picked up the box. It was surprisingly heavy. I carried it into the kitchen and placed it on the granite island. Richard followed me, hovering by the doorway like a nervous ghost. I took a paring knife from the block. The scrape of the blade slicing through the packing tape was unnaturally loud in the silent room. Richard made a small, choked sound. I'm warning you, Eleanor. I lifted the flaps. Inside, nestled in a bed of white tissue paper, was not a bomb. It was not poison. It was something far, far worse. The first thing I saw was a single earring. It was a diamond and sapphire drop, exquisitely made and clearly very expensive. I had never seen it before in my life. It was not my style. Underneath it was a stack of papers. I lifted them out. They were bank statements, but not from our joint accounts. They were from an account at a private Swiss bank under Richard's name alone. The statements detailed a series of wire transfers over the past 10 years, totaling a staggering sum, over $3 million. The recipient of every single transfer was a corporation I didn't recognize, Rossi Imports. My hands began to shake. My blood ran cold. Richard was still standing in the doorway, his face ashen. He knew. He knew what was in the box. Beneath the bank statements was a thick, glossy 8x10 photograph. It took all of my remaining strength to look at it. It was Richard. He was on a boat, the sun kissing his face, a brilliant blue sea behind him. He looked 10 years younger, happier than I had seen him in decades. His arm was wrapped tightly around a woman. She was beautiful, of course. Dark, flowing hair, olive skin, a smile that could melt glaciers. She was wearing the matching sapphire earring. My breath hitched in my chest. I felt the air leave my body in a painful rush, as if I'd been punched. The background of the photo was familiar. It was Capri. Richard had told me he was there for an international banking conference 2 years ago. He had gone alone. It would bore you to tears, darling, he had said. The final item was at the very bottom of the box. It was a small, velvet-wrapped object and a sealed envelope with my name on it. My fingers, clumsy with shock, fumbled with the velvet. Inside was a key, a modern, sleek key with a fancy electronic fob attached. It wasn't for our house, or our cars, or our safety deposit box. With a deep, shuddering breath, I picked up the envelope. This was it. The narration to my life's ruin. I tore it open. It was a letter from Michael. Dearest Mum, I'm so sorry. To do this to you on this day of all days is the cruelest thing I have ever had to do. But I cannot stand by and watch him destroy you any longer. Please, please believe that I am doing this out of the deepest love. I have known for a while. It started with a gut feeling, a slip of the tongue from him on the phone, a mention of a name I didn't recognize. I hired a private investigator. I know it sounds sordid and awful, but I had to know the truth. Her name is Isabella Rossi. She's 28 years younger than him. He has been with her for 12 years. Mum, he didn't just give her his time. He gave her our money. Your money. The money your father left you. The inheritance that he was supposed to be managing for our family's future. He set her up in a business, Rossi Imports. He bought her a condominium in the city. The key is in the box. The bank statements are just the tip of the iceberg. He has been systematically draining your assets to fund his second life. I tried to confront him. I flew out last month under the pretense of a business trip. I laid it all out for him. I begged him to tell you, to end it, to try and make things right. He laughed at me. He called me a naive boy. He told me that you were happy in your ignorance, and that I would be a fool to disrupt the perfect life he had provided for us. He threatened to cut me off, to disinherit me, as if I cared about the money. He doesn't understand, Mum. He never has. He thinks love can be bought and sold like one of his stocks. I knew if I just told you, he would deny it. He would lie and twist the story until you were the one apologizing. He is a master manipulator, so I gathered the proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. I am sending it to you because you are the strongest person I know, and you deserve the truth, no matter how much it hurts. About the symbol on the box, the knight. Do you remember when I was a boy and we would play chess? You told me the knight was the most special piece because it didn't move in a straight line. It could jump over other pieces, see things from a different angle. You taught me to always look for the knight's move, the unexpected strategy. This is my knight's move, Mom. He would see it and know I was breaking the rules of his game. He would be scared. I hoped his fear would prove his guilt before you even opened it. I love you more than words can say. I will call you tonight. Whatever you decide to do, I am with you. Always. Your loving son, Michael. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through a film of tears I wasn't aware I was shedding. The sounds in the kitchen seemed to warp and fade. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. It was all a distant hum. The world had narrowed to the piece of paper in my hand and the hollowed-out cavern where my heart used to be. 12 years. My grandson, Leo, was 10. He had been having this affair for longer than my grandson had been alive. The trips, the late nights at the office, the sudden disinterest in our shared life. It all clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. I had not been a wife. I had been a convenience. A respectable front for a life of deceit. The perfect, elegant, unsuspecting fool. I slowly folded the letter and placed it back on the island next to the photograph of the happy couple. I looked at the key. A home he had bought for another woman with my father's money. Finally, I lifted my gaze and met Richards in the doorway. The terror was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, hard resignation. The game was up. "Eleanor," he started, his voice a pathetic croak. "Let me explain." Explain? My own voice was alien to me. It was a low, dead thing, devoid of emotion. Explain what, Richard? The 12 years, the $3 million? Or should we start with the woman whose name is apparently Isabella? He flinched as if I had struck him. He took a hesitant step into the room. "It's not what you think. She was a business associate. It was a mistake. A series of mistakes. A 12-year mistake?" I picked up the photograph. "You look very much at peace for a man making a mistake. In fact, I don't think I've seen you look this happy since before Michael was born." His face hardened. The faux contrition vanished, replaced by the familiar arrogance I had mistaken for confidence for so long. "All right. Yes. It happened. But what did you expect, Eleanor? You let yourself go. You became comfortable, boring. Our life was a routine, not a marriage. A woman like Isabella, she's vibrant. She's full of life. She made me feel alive. The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He wasn't just confessing, he was blaming me. He was rewriting our entire history to justify his betrayal. A flicker of something hot and powerful ignited in the icy wasteland of my shock. It was rage. Pure, unadulterated rage. I became boring, I said, my voice rising. I raised our son while you were building your empire. I managed this house. I hosted your insufferable business partners and their vapid wives. I supported every venture, every risk, every single selfish decision you ever made. I was not your partner, Richard. I was your unpaid CEO, your social secretary, and your housekeeper. And while I was running your life for you, you were using my money to buy trinkets for your whore. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. He recoiled, his face contorting in a sneer. Don't you dare talk about her that way, he spat. And don't be so naive as to think it was your money. I'm the one who grew it, who turned your father's modest inheritance into a fortune. You wouldn't have a penny to your name if it weren't for my genius. And that was his second and final mistake. He had always believed that. He believed his own myth. He thought I was the docile, financially illiterate wife who just signed where she was told to sign. He had forgotten who my father was. My father, Arthur Gable, hadn't been a flashy man, but he was a shrewd one. He had seen the slick, ambitious hunger in Richard from day one, and he had taken precautions. I began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a full-throated, slightly unhinged laugh. It was the sound of a dam breaking. Richard stared at me, bewildered. What's so funny? I wiped a tear from my eye, a tear of mirth, not sorrow. You are what's funny, Richard. You really believe you're the master of the universe, don't you? The financial wizard. I walked past him, out of the kitchen and into his grand mahogany-panelled study, his sanctuary. I went to the bookshelf, the one filled with leather-bound first editions he'd never read, and pulled out a copy of Moby Dick. Tucked inside was a hidden key. I used it to unlock a small, ornate wooden box on his desk, a box he thought contained only old family photos. Inside, beneath the photos, was a false bottom. I lifted it out. Underneath was a single, thick document, bound in blue. I turned and held it up for him to see. Do you know what this is, Richard? I asked, my voice now calm, clear, and as sharp as shattered glass. This is the original prenuptial agreement we signed 45 years ago, the one your hotshot lawyer drew up. And this, I said, tapping a specific clause, is the part you've apparently forgotten. It's called the Gable Trust Addendum. My father insisted on it. I watched the colour drain from his face as comprehension dawned. The addendum stipulates, I continued, enjoying the cadence of my own voice, that my entire inheritance and any and all profits, dividends, or assets derived from its investment remain my sole and separate property. You were granted signatory authority to manage the funds, yes, but you were never given ownership. Every stock you bought, every property you invested in, every dollar that flowed into your firm, it all originated from the Gable Trust. My trust. I let the words hang in the air. That's not a business you built, Richard. It's a portfolio I allowed you to manage. This house? My trust bought it. The cars? My trust. Your fancy suits? Your club membership? Your entire life of luxury? It was all funded by the boring woman you so casually discarded. I paused, walking closer to him, the document held like a weapon. The $3 million you wired to your mistress. That wasn't a withdrawal. Legally speaking, it was grand larceny, embezzlement, from me. He stared at the document, then at me. his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The swagger, the arrogance, the very foundation of his being was crumbling before my eyes. He had built his kingdom on what he thought was rock, but it was quicksand, and he was sinking fast. You knew? He stammered. All this time? I knew the terms of my own inheritance, yes, I said coolly. I trusted you to honor them. I see now that trust was a greater mistake than any you claim to have made. He collapsed into his leather armchair, a broken man in a bespoke suit. The fight was gone. There was nothing left but the pathetic, hollow shell of a narcissist who had just discovered he was not the sun, but a minor, forgotten moon. So what now? He whispered, looking up at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in our marriage. You're going to leave me? I smiled, a thin, cold, merciless smile. Oh, Richard, leaving you is just the beginning. The next morning, I did not wake up crying. I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief was there, a dull, heavy ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a cold, galvanizing sense of purpose. I was not just a victim. I was a creditor, and I had come to collect. My first call was to David Chen. David was my father's lawyer, and now his son, David Jr., ran the firm. He was a quiet, meticulous man who had been sending me discreet quarterly reports on the Gable Trust for decades, reports Richard had dismissed as legal busywork and told me not to worry my pretty little head about. David, I said when he answered, my voice steady. It's Eleanor Vance. I need to invoke Article 7, Section 4 of the Trust, the clause pertaining to gross marital misconduct and financial malfeasance. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. Eleanor, of course. Are you all right? I've never been better, David, I said. I'm emailing you a set of bank statements and some other evidence. I want you to freeze every asset Richard has access to. Revoke his signatory authority immediately. I want divorce papers drawn up by noon. And I want to file a civil suit against one Isabella Rossi for the recovery of misappropriated funds. Consider it done, he said, his voice laced with the grim satisfaction of a lawyer about to win the case of a lifetime. While David set the legal wheels in motion, I made my own moves. Richard was a creature of habit and ego. He was a senior partner at his firm, Vance and Sterling. Or rather, what he thought was his firm. The seed money, the initial capital that had launched it 30 years ago, had come from my trust. I was a silent majority partner. A fact I had a feeling he had conveniently omitted from his partners. I called an emergency board meeting for 2 p.m. Richard, meanwhile, had locked himself in the guest room, no doubt frantically calling his own lawyers, only to discover his accounts were frozen solid. He couldn't even pay a retainer. At 1:30 p.m., I walked into the gleaming glass and steel lobby of Vance and Sterling. I was dressed in a charcoal grey Chanel suit I'd owned for 20 years. My armour. The receptionist, a young woman who always treated me with polite condescension, looked startled to see me. Mrs. Vance, what a surprise. Mr. Vance isn't in today. I know, I said, walking past her towards the boardroom, but I am. The other 3 senior partners, men I had entertained in my home for decades, were already assembled, looking confused. They stood up when I entered. Eleanor, what's going on? Richard isn't answering his phone, said Marcus Sterling, a man whose children's christenings I had attended. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed a copy of the firm's founding charter and the Gable Trust documents on the polished table. I laid out the Swiss bank statements. I told them everything. To their credit, the shock was quickly replaced by the cold calculation of businessmen protecting their investment. They were not friends of Richard's, they were partners in profit, and he had just threatened that profit. By the time I finished, Their faces were grim. Richard had not just cheated on his wife. He had exposed the entire firm to a massive scandal and potential legal action. He had used company resources and time to manage his illicit affair. He was a liability they could not afford. When I left an hour later, Richard Vance was no longer a partner at the firm that bore his name. His portrait was already being taken down from the wall of founders. I returned home to find Richard in the living room, surrounded by suitcases. He looked haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. He had aged a decade in a day. "They kicked me out," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "My own firm. They treated me like a criminal." "You are a criminal, Richard," I replied, setting my purse down. "You just had the good fortune to steal from someone who preferred a quiet coup to a public execution." "What am I supposed to do?" he wailed, the pathetic self-pity grating on my last nerve. "My accounts are frozen. My credit cards are declined. I have nothing." "You have your health," I said, "and you have your memories of Capri. I'm sure they will keep you warm." He lunged forward and grabbed my arms, his grip surprisingly strong. "Eleanor, please, don't do this. Think of all the years we had, the good times. Think of Michael." I pulled my arms free, my face a mask of contempt. The good times were a lie, and as for Michael, he is the one who gave me the courage to do this. He saved me from dying a fool. The divorce was swift and brutal. With David's evidence, Richard had no leverage. He got to keep his clothes and a 10-year-old sedan. The house, the art collection, the remaining liquid assets. Everything went to me. It was never his to begin with. The lawsuit against Isabella Rossi was even more satisfying. Faced with charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, she folded immediately. Her lawyer advised her to return everything. The condominium was sold. The money from its sale, along with the contents of her business accounts, was returned to the Gable Trust. She was left with nothing but a tarnished reputation and some very expensive, now pawned, jewelry. I heard from a friend of a friend that she moved back to Italy, her American dream in tatters. She, like Richard, had made the fatal mistake of believing the myth of his power. Karma, however, had one final, exquisite blow to deliver. About a year after the divorce, I was having lunch with Michael and his family. They had flown in to help me pack up the big house. I had decided to sell it, to shed the last skin of my old life. We were sitting in a small, charming bistro downtown. My grandson, Leo, was chattering about his soccer game. Sarah and I were laughing. Michael was watching me, his eyes full of a quiet, profound love. For the first time in over a year, I felt a sense of peace. And then I saw him. Through the restaurant window, I saw Richard. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting blazer and pushing a metal cart full of cleaning supplies into the office building across the street. He was on the night janitorial crew. His silver hair was thinning, his confident stride replaced by a weary shuffle. He looked old, small, irrelevant. He didn't see me. He was just another anonymous worker heading into the night, invisible to the world that had once been his stage. The sight didn't fill me with glee, as I might have once expected. It didn't even fill me with pity. It filled me with a strange sense of finality. His grand life, his affairs, his arrogance, it had all amounted to this. A man pushing a mop bucket in the dark. He hadn't just lost his money. He had lost his identity because his identity was woven entirely from the fabric of my fortune. Without it, he was nothing. Michael saw me looking. He followed my gaze, and his hand instinctively found mine on the table. He squeezed it. "Are you okay, Mum?" he asked softly. I turned back to him, to the beautiful family that was my true legacy. I looked at my son, the boy who had played the knight's move to save his mother. "Yes, Michael," I said, and a genuine smile spread across my face. I'm perfectly okay. I sold the big house in Connecticut and bought a beautiful, light-filled apartment in the city, close to the museums and theatres I loved. I established a foundation in my father's name, one that provides legal aid and financial counseling to women escaping abusive relationships. I travel. I see my grandson play soccer. I am, for the first time in my adult life, entirely my own woman. Every Mother's Day, Michael sends me a gift. It's never extravagant. A book of poetry, a framed photo of Leo, a plant for my balcony. There are no more orchids, and every year, when I open his gift, I think of that other box, the Pandora's box that Richard was so terrified of. He was right to be afraid. He saw the symbol of the night and knew the game had changed. He thought it was a box of destruction. And it was. It destroyed a life built on lies. But for me, it was not an ending. It was a key. It was the most painful, most terrifying, and most liberating Mother's Day gift I have ever received. It was the gift of truth. And with it, Michael didn't just send me a box, he sent me back to myself.